How is the race going? Well, in order to assess that, you'd have to survey the people. And luckily, my next guest does this all the time. He's Robert Cahaly, the chief pollster for the Trafalgar Group, and he joins us on the phone. Robert, great to have you back with us, sir. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to be here, sir.
It's a wild election, and you've been conducting surveys in particular of the swing states. You've been taking a look. What are you finding?
Well, we have been conducting. Matt Towery from Insider Advantage, who are often paired together on Hannity and other shows. We've been dividing up the states, and each time we'll each do a piece of them so we can get all 7 at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also hear about that on our podcast, Polling Plus, that we host every week.
Love that.
But what we're finding right now is this race is just razor thin. I believe we have Michigan and Georgia are dead even. Trump has a little bit of a lead in Pennsylvania by 2, North Carolina by 1, which is just really kind of scary, and Arizona and Nevada by 1. So, I mean, just it was inside the margin of error, and inside of the margin where that election day and election leading up to election day activities can affect things.
Yeah. Do you know how that compares to your polling in 2020?
Trump is doing better right now than he was in 2020 in most of these. However, we didn't do a lot of polling this early, but he's doing a little bit better. But he kind of surged at the end in 2020, which of course there was a lot less people voting because of the mail-in ballots.
Yes. Well, according to, it's not just your polling. Of course, there's a lot of pollsters who are out there. And according to the Real Clear Politics average of polls, this is the best position that Donald Trump has ever been in heading into one of these elections. That includes 2016 and 2020. So should we find encouragement in that?
Well, I would put it to you this way. There's a lot of trial and error in politics. And when I look at what the Democrats have learned to do, there's really no comparison to the Democrat on the ground to get out the vote effort. There's just no comparison.
Yeah.
They have a well-oiled machine that Republicans ought to be envious of. And they've perfected a lot of what they do. And so I would say that's worth a point or two in almost every race. And so that's what does not give me comfort.
Got it.
That's what makes me feel like these numbers are good, but these guys are a lot better at this than they were in 2020. They learned a lot in 2020 and 2022.
I want to talk a little bit about voters and what you're seeing out there. So we have the top line numbers where you're saying we've got a razor thin race in a lot of these battleground states. Are you noticing any trends in the demographics? Because one of the big picture stories are we're seeing a lot of shuffling among voters. In the past, people made assumptions based on race and gender and income. A lot of those assumptions have been broken by Donald Trump. Do you see that in the polling?
We do. In 2020, Trump did not do as well with the seniors as Republicans generally do. And a lot of that could go to COVID, but now we see Trump much more competitive with the seniors. We see the seniors as a moving group that can be affected. They're one of the only groups that still you reach with traditional advertising in mass. Also, some of them have buyer's remorse. They kind of voted COVID in 2020, and now they've paid, seen the inflation, everything else, and it just depends. I mean, the ones that, some of the lower income seniors that feel like the Biden administration has benefited them are in place, and Kamala can count on them. But there's a lot of movement of the middle and higher income. Young people, Trump was doing really well with those until Kamala got in the race. Now, we do see an interesting divide with the youngest group. We talk about there being a gender gap. The strongest gender gap is in the 18 to 24 Gen Z group. There's just a huge difference between those, the females being for Harris and the males being for Trump. And so we see that. We overall, there's a tremendous gender gap. And we're seeing a lot of the black vote kind of returning to Kamala. I do think that being said, Trump will outdo what he did with both black voters and Hispanic voters in 2020 this year. So I do expect to see improvement there, but not some of the expectations I think that a lot of folks had when it was against Biden.
Right. Well, he had already, I mean, if he has the same success with Hispanic voters that he did in 2020, that's already a seismic shift that President Trump has produced.
No question.
There.
And we're expecting to beat that number.
And you're expecting to beat that. Okay, that's a huge deal. And if he picks up a couple of points with black voters, that really could make all the difference in some of these key battleground states, couldn't it?
Absolutely, it could. And there's also the effect of the lawfare. They're throwing Cornel West off the ballot in some of these states, and he certainly has an appeal in some of those communities. They're keeping. I think Wisconsin and Michigan have already ruled that Robert F. Kennedy stays on the ballot, even though he's gotten out. So I mean, there's a lot of games being played on who's on the ballot. They're not just doing, follow the rules, you stay on the ballot, kind of that stuff.
They're literally ballot meddling. That's precisely what that is. So when it comes to, in the past, Robert Cahaly, again, with the Trafalgar Group, you and I have talked in particular about the way that Trump voters respond to pollsters. I remember discussing at length with you now 4 years ago the phenomenon of the shy Trump voter, that it was difficult for pollsters to establish Trump's support because a lot of people who might support Trump didn't really feel like telling a stranger that. They hung up the phone and they sent him on their merry way. What are you seeing now? Is that shyness still out there? And to the extent that it is, how much has it changed?
It's amazing how it's kind of it shifts a little bit. A lot of the people who we found that were kind of Trump shy in years past are a little more bold about it. But certainly, depending upon the circles that people run in, we still see it. It's tremendous because again, there's more. People are beginning to be more and more skeptical of who's polling them and what they're doing with the information than they ever have been. And so there's a concern about, am I going to be put on a list if I say this or that? And so you are seeing, especially people who kind of think that this would put them outside of their social circle norm. Right. We still see a lot of the Trump shyness. And the other thing to remember is, that's the social desirability bias, and that got its name called the Bradley effect in a California race for governor, where the support for the black candidate was overstated because the people that were being polled wanted, didn't want the person asking the question to think that they might be somehow bigoted or something by not saying that name. Mm-hmm. So the possibility exists, and we're doing some research on this, that you could have shy Trump voters and people who are staying there for Kamala who don't intend to vote for her.
Yes.
You could have a double social desirability bias going on here.
How difficult is it to actually poll people and get an accurate reading on the temperature of the country? Because it feels like it's got to be more difficult than ever. Because, for instance, just in my own life, I get phone calls. If I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize and I'm not expecting an unfamiliar phone number, chances are I'm not answering it. It's like I
totally. That's exactly what we talk about all the time. Is when I look at these. I might laugh at them when these pollsters. We only do live calls. And my simple question is, who is it that you're talking to under 50 that's answering the phone from a number they don't recognize and conversing with them verbally? I want to meet those people because they're weird. They're not average people. You can't poll anybody under 50 that way. You just can't.
No, that's a huge section of the populace for which we get muddy data. What's the solution here?
Well, we're big believers in text message. Now, a lot of pollsters tell you they send text messages. Here's the difference. What most pollsters do is they send a text message with a link for someone to click on the link and then take the survey on the online platform. The younger and more savvy someone is, the less likely they are to click on a random link.
Right.
We do it the complete opposite way. We send you the question and let you answer A, B, and then we'll serve you the next question. Now, that is the most expensive and time-consuming way to do it, but it's the best way to get groups that are not going to answer the phone live and are hesitant to click random links.
How much of I wonder if, as a guy whose job is to do this, one thing, a common critique I hear from people who typically they don't like the poll result or they're reflexively untrusting is that they think that most of these polling firms are just out there to try and bias the election in some way, either to dishearten the people who are on the losing end or to create the idea that maybe the race is closer than it actually is in order to induce fundraising. How much of this is just a hustle in your view? I mean, and how accurate are your competitors?
Well, I would put it to you this way. I always say that, polls have one of two purposes. They're either intended to reflect the electorate or they intended to affect the electorate.
Right.
And the best way to try to figure out what's happening is go to Real Clear and look at like the total like last 10-year ranking. And if the name of the firm you see isn't on that list, then this is a firm that doesn't want to be accountable for what they say, or what they say is so wrong they didn't make the list. And those are the ones you should avoid. Because if you're not willing to put your polls out there the last 3 weeks and be judged year in and year out, I mean, you're going to have bad years, you're going to have great years. But if you're not willing to, put yourself to that ultimate test, which is error rate, then I wouldn't trust them. And there are a lot of groups that you hear their name all the time, and yet they never seem to want to put anything out there, or they just don't make it. But Real Clear ranks this stuff. They're the standard. They come closer to what the result is every election cycle than any other ranking group. So I'd look for that.
Yeah.
Because some of it's just obvious. When you see, I mean, we see it both ways. We see firms that are in the tank for the Democrats, and then we see firms we know are in the tank for the Republicans. Now, some of us, some will say that, we're Republican leaning and that the other groups are Democrat leaning. Well, all I'm saying is just look at the cumulative error rate. I mean, in presidential cycles, we have the lowest cumulative error rate of any polling group. And in overall, we have the lowest error rate of any private sector firm. There's only universities ahead of us, and not but one that does more than 30 polls.
Yeah. Man, I always love talking to you about that. Do you ever get tired of talking about polling and numbers? It sounds like you have an unending supply of ideas about this.
I do get tired of it, though. But I'll tell you sometimes what I tell people on planes when they ask what I do, because it ain't politics.
That's funny. I love it. So, and lastly, a recent phenomenon in American elections is now we have betting odds. You have all these websites where you see the betting odds will favor one candidate over the other. And I'm looking, Real Clear Politics actually keeps track of this. As of today, President Trump maintains a 1-point advantage over Kamala Harris in the betting markets. Do you think that that's a meaningful metric for us to take a glance at and say who's destined to win an election?
Well, I think the betting odds reflect the polling and what people are seeing quite often, because when you're betting, when you're setting betting odds, you're ignoring the nonsense polling groups, and you're looking at that error rate and cumulative to make your decision about to set those odds.
Right.
And frankly, it's why those of us that are ethical in this business have all chosen to not engage in betting, because we know that we can change the odds, and we just don't think it's ethical for us to do it.
Right.
So
There's a conflict.
We don't participate in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we know that the odds move based on what we put out there.
For sure. And when people put real money on the line, it really indicates, they've done their homework and this is what they think is going to happen because they'd like to win, obviously. Robert Cahaly with the Trafalgar Group, really appreciate your time today, and I hope you'll come back and join us in these final 60 or so days ahead of the election.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.